leadership development. I do recognize a few participant names that have been with me on past presentations through the FLC, so welcome back. Over the next hour or so, my goal is to teach each and every one of you as much as possible about leadership development. But I want to preface the whole topic about leadership development because we all know if you go to a bookstore or you log into leadership development, there are millions of resources available. My presentation to you today is specific to agriculture, be it either an agribusiness, a farmer, somebody involved in agriculture, based on my experience working with farms across Canada in the last 20 years. So this one's a bit more unique other than picking up a book on the shelf. And I do find that working a lot with my small farmers, that often they say they can't relate to some of the leadership books that are on the bookshelves because they speak of case studies around Dell or very large organizations, Microsoft, that our businesses can't relate to. So my job today is to bring this down to a real-world level of agriculture in Canada. So having said that, I also would like to keep this as interactive as possible. We're a nice-sized group. I'm able to engage in questions and answers a lot. So allow this opportunity as almost perhaps one-on-one consulting using my expertise to help you address your own leadership issues. So pepper me with questions anytime, or at the end I want to allow about 15 or 20 minutes for vocal questions. So we are about to begin. What I am going to cover with you today are motivation techniques. What motivates employees and how can you motivate them? And I'm sure that all of you have worked with or have an employee or two that you can't quite figure out what makes them tick. So we'll talk about that today. Talk about how leadership directly impacts employee performance and how your behavior directly influences the behavior of the people that you lead. So when you have an employee that is not performing, the very first person I look at is the manager or the leader. We'll talk about that. I'm going to give you a very simple solution, if you will, for reasons for poor performance, and three very, very common reasons. And again, if you have an employee that isn't your top-notch employee, there's three questions to ask yourself to help you understand why they're not performing. I'm going to talk a lot about leveraging talent and how to leverage talent within your company or your organization to drive objectives, and perhaps what levers you are pulling or not pulling in order to get that high-performing team. I'm going to talk about how to keep them. I'm going to talk how to motivate, manage, and keep, because ideally you want to keep those top performers. I'm going to share with you some stories about feedback, and in fact my whole presentation today will have a lot of real stories of experiences that I and my clients have had across Canada, farm stories of what's worked and what hasn't worked. And at the end we'll talk a little bit about those problem employees. So that is my agenda for today. I will leave this open for about 30 seconds just to ask you if there's a topic that perhaps you were hoping that I would cover that isn't on this page. So if that topic isn't there, please just quickly type it in and I'll make sure I address it. So I'll just wait 30 seconds to see what topics we might add to our presentation today. I see a few people are typing, so I'll just wait for the typing to end. Paul has typed about dealing with stressful situations. Paul, I'm just going to ask a question to clarify that issue. Is it how you as a manager deals with stressful situations, or how you get your employees to deal with stressful situations? So if you could just type in manager or employee. And Leo has talked about family employees, and I'll speak to that throughout the presentation, but I will make sure that I do address it in some detail. And Paul, so we're talking about how you handle stress. Got it. All right, let me start from the beginning. I grew up in rural Manitoba on a grain farm. It was a second-generation grain farm. And at a very young age, I'm going to say probably about 11 or 12 years old, I realized that my passion was in agriculture, but not as a farmer, but more in addressing or understanding people on the farms. Now, my dad, as a farmer, always had a tough time finding seasonal workers. It was always a chaotic time during seeding and even more chaotic during harvest. And it's stressful, extremely stressful for both him and my mother and the community itself, as all the farmers were trying to find talent for the seasonal work. And I was absolutely intrigued and engaged in a few farms only miles away that never seemed to have that problem, that never seemed to be as stressed, as panicky, and who ended up having at a young age that I decided that's what I wanted to do. So my field of study started with human resources, but I found that human resources was very generic and that HR overall talks a lot about benefits and compensation and legislation and policies and procedures, and my passion is people. So I continued practicing HR, but went into a field of study called Certified Performance Technologist. And as Don introduced me, I am one of the few in Canada that has this international certification. And what it means is that it's a methodology of understanding human performance. So like a sports coach that manages a sports team, my talent is managing people within an organization and understanding the talent in a company, in a farm, in a business, so that you can leverage the talent. So that's sort of why I'm qualified to speak to this today, because I took the experience of growing on a farm and my frustration of watching the dynamics on a farm in terms of leadership, managing, retaining people, and I've now created my entire business around that. So as I speak today, I'll be speaking with that educational component, but also my lessons learned, if you will. So let's talk about what motivates employees. Let's start with that conversation. If we were in a coffee room and having a very comfortable discussion, and I asked each of you, can you motivate someone? We would have a debate, guaranteed. Every time I ask that question, there is a difference of opinion. Question is, can you motivate someone? Now, as thoughts are going through your mind, can you motivate someone? Here's my belief. I believe that we as human beings are motivated internally, that each of us have something different inside us that motivates and drives us. So as a leader, again, the question, can you motivate me? My argument is you can't motivate me because my motivation is internal, but what you can do is create an environment in which I am motivated. I'll just repeat that. Motivation comes from within. Motivation is internal. So you can't manage, you as a manager can't motivate somebody, but what you can do is create a motivating environment or situation. So for example, Client A. Client A has an employee in Saskatchewan. And this employee has been a long-term employee, 7 or 8 years. And this employee on the grain farm tends to be one of those employees that is sometimes motivated, energized, engaged, otherwise somewhat complacent, kind of like your mediocre employee. So the question is, how do we motivate them? So when you take a look at how to motivate somebody, again, you can't motivate them, but you can create the environment. My comment is to figure out what motivates employees, you need to do 3 things. You need to watch, ask, and listen. So this employee was motivated when? And it was interesting because the owners of the farm couldn't quite figure out when he was motivated. And it was good conversation as the husband and wife tried to figure out, well, when is Bob motivated? And as they continued to sort of share ideas of when they thought they saw Bob motivated, we suddenly realized when Bob was motivated. Bob was motivated in the spring when he managed the night shift seeding team. This is a 12,000-acre farm, and during seeding they have a night shift. He managed the night shift because he had been one of the employees at the farm the longest, and they trusted him to manage this team at nighttime. So what that said to us is that he is motivated by managing others. And they could see that when he had that shift, that responsibility, he became very engaged and took accountability. So that was a situation of watching to recognize how he's motivated. So long story short, and the whole thing about motivating is you have to watch people, because when people are motivated, you're going to see their body language is different, their attitude is different. It's also the same in asking questions. What do you like most about your job? What do you like least? And listen. But what's interesting about motivation is, and here's a quote that I love, is one person's motivation is another person's poison. One person's motivation is another person's poison. Here's another fun story. A call center about 10 years ago called us in to ask us to address an employee performance issue. Now, this call center is one of those call centers that call people at nighttime. They're the ones when you're trying to have dinner or the annoying phone call trying to sell you something. So it's a pretty tough job, high turnover. So this company had a group of outbound telemarketers, and they had a team of 25. They decided they wanted to have some contests to raise the selling of whatever it was they were selling. And they had a woman on this team that was in her 40s. The rest of the team were in their early 20s. And this woman came on board, and the first month she surpassed everybody. Now the award, the motivation they thought they were going to do, motivation, they thought cash, we will give a $500 check to the person who has the most sales this month. $500, big check. So the first month, this woman in her 40s gets the $500. So the manager brings everybody together, buys pizza for lunch, has this big speech about the contest, has a big check written for $500, and presents the check to this woman. Let's call her Mary. So Mary has to get up in front of her peers, round of applause, the manager provides her with the big check, and there's a picture taken for the newsletter. The next month, Mary again beats everybody, comes back for the lunch at the end of the month, and gets her check and her picture and the handshake and the claps. The third month, Mary's sales were minimal. Fourth month, Mary's sales were minimal. So the question went to the manager as to why her performance was waning. That motivation idea to her was poison. Mary is an introvert. She's not motivated by going on stage and getting a round of applause. She likes being behind a cubicle where she doesn't have to be with people, and she's making phone calls. So there was an error of a manager using a motivational tactic that didn't work. So having said that, when you take a look at motivation, it is a science in itself, and it's one that requires a manager a lot of time to understand. And the only way you can understand motivation is to look at your people and watch them ask questions and listen. I will ask you this question, though. You'll see on this slide there's a revolving door. So why do employees stay? What are some things that you believe are reasons why people stay? So we found throughout the country that one of the top reasons why people stay in a business on a farm is that they feel valued. They're important. The second is that it's a safe place to work. And I am beginning to see that as a trend. As I travel across the country looking at HR on the farms, a theme or a trend that I'm seeing is that people that are looking for work are now looking for farms that are safe. And it's interesting because 10-ish years ago, that was never really a topic. It was not something that was top of mind for people looking for work. and now it's become that. So I'm finding a safe place to work as being an important thing as to why people either will want to work for you or will stay. And people like a challenge. And the research is showing that the younger generation in particular, the Gen Ys and the Gen Xs, are motivated by challenge. They will always want something different. Why do people stay? They stay because of great people. They stay because of the team, and they stay particularly because of the boss. They want fair pay, and they want meaningful work, that they're making a difference. So I want to talk a little bit about making a difference and meaningful work. And some of you that have been on my prior webinars might remember this story, but it's about my pepper picking farm. And I pause because I often will get tongue-tied. So a farm in Ontario, a pepper picking farm, had a group of laborers that every year would pick the peppers. And this one year in particular, the farmer called me and asked me to help because this group seemed disengaged. There was some toxicity happening with the group, and there seemed to be just some overall displeasure. So we were trying to figure out, well, what is motivating them to be this way, or what has happened to demotivate them? And it didn't take me very long. So what I did is I sat down with each and every pepper picker and asked them questions about their satisfaction and what they liked and didn't like. And it was evident that out of the group of pepper pickers, there was a lack of appreciation. There was a sense that what they did meant nothing. Now let me back up and share with you what happened that year. So while the pepper pickers were off, it wasn't the season for peppers, the owner of the company was forced, if you will, from the biggest customer they had. 80% of their sales came from one of the largest grocery chains. And the grocery chain said to the pepper farmer, we would like you to package the peppers differently. We want it in this shape, this size, in this wrap, and this is what we want. And the farmer realized the importance of appeasing the client, the customer, so they changed the process. No one at any time explained the rationale to the pepper pickers. And what happens often in motivation in terms of employees, if they don't understand the why, there is a confusion in terms of their work, why they're doing things differently. And when confusion happens, quite often fear starts to come into play. And this is what happened to the pepper pickers, is they didn't understand why they were packaging and picking the peppers differently. And as a result, they felt that they didn't matter. They were at the bottom of the totem pole, the food chain, and as a result became demotivated. So when you take a look at motivation at work, there's a lot of layers of motivation, and one of them is meaningful work and making sure that you communicate. But I want to ask you, I'm going to go back to the other slide, so we understand why people stay. There's no rocket science there. But I would like to ask you about why they leave. Now, when I ask this question, people will often say, well, it's a farm, they got a job somewhere else that pays more money. The oil fields will pay them more money. The bigger companies will pay them more money. Or they're gone back to school, they got another opportunity. And we can flip chart or make a list of 20, 30 reasons why they left. But let me share with you the number one reason why somebody leaves. That reason is you. That reason is the manager. It's the leader. And it's mind-boggling when I say that to clients. No, it can't be me. I'm a good leader. I communicate with my people. I treat my people like family. But when I continue the questions about why they left, employees will say to me, well, I'm not going to tell my boss that I left or I'm quitting because of him or her. It's easier for me to say I got more money somewhere else or I have another opportunity. The number one reason people quit is the boss, which is refreshing because all of you are on this webinar to understand leadership and how to be a more effective leader. So congratulations on that. When you go home at night, when any of your employees go home at night, what are they talking about? They are talking about work. What happened at work? The family will be at the dinner table, driving to a hockey game, chatting about the day at work. And when they're talking about the day at work, the tone of work, whatever happened at work, is created from the boss. So you as a manager impact the employee, but you also impact their family lives. And we don't realize that. We often don't take that into consideration. So when you think about motivation, I want you to think about how much time it takes to understand motivation, but it's something that you have to watch for and you have to be really attuned to. And I want you to remember the reasons why people stay, which are fairly simple, and why they leave. So let's talk then about leadership and how your leadership directly impacts their performance. Good leaders are strategic thinkers who see beyond the day's crisis. I had an interview this morning, very timely. As I'm in my interview this morning, and it's for a small business, they want to hire a laborer, just a general person that can do a lot of mechanical cleanup stuff. And as I'm interviewing this gentleman, I asked him why he's thinking about leaving his last place of residence, or his employment, where he is now. And he said, Michelle, the manager, our leader, has no sense of direction. We don't know if the company's going to be here tomorrow or not. We don't know if we're growing or downsizing. We don't know what's going on. And every day there seems to be a fire. And every day there's some chaos. I can't live that way anymore. I'm taking it home. I don't like going to work. Leaders are strategic thinkers. And they're ones that, rather than always putting out the fires, are looking proactively. Now, I know that many of you on the farm will say there's always fires. And in any business, there's always going to be fires. But a true leader thinks strategically, and rather than reacting in that crisis panic mode, is able to calm the staff down and get them to think strategically about issues and fires. True leadership is about vision, values, and motivation. It's about giving people a sense of purpose and feeling proud about where they work. Leaders don't accept the status quo. It's not about complacency. It's about change. It's about innovation. It's about doing something different. It's about new equipment, new technologies. And true leadership is inspiring others to do better work. When you think back, each and every one of you, if you've had the opportunity to work with a manager, a supervisor, and somebody that pushed you, and somebody that made you who you are today, think about the respect you have for that person. And that's what you want to be, but even better. And I'm challenged often at the number of leaders that will blatantly say, Michelle, I can't push George anymore. This is all George can do. I can't give my staff any more work. They can't handle it. Can't give them anything. I can't give them that to do. They're not going to do it right. If those words are coming out of your mouth, you need to look at your leadership. As a true leader, our goal is to inspire people and to grow people. And it's one of the most motivating, wonderful things to do. So how do we do that? That's what we're going to talk about, leadership. Now, this slide is of particular interest to me because it's something that I started to practice and recommend about 10 years ago. And what happens when we start running a business is we get so tied up in the business, everything that's going on in the business, and we quite often are working in the business. And we don't recognize how much influence we have on the culture of our business and the direction that our business is going. So this slide is a theater. And I recommend that leaders, at least once a year, go onto the balcony. And what I mean by that is that you remove yourself, almost like you can watch yourself in action. And try to watch what type of leader you are, what type of message you're sending, and what type of environment you're creating. It's all you. And we don't stop very often to really take a look at ourselves. And this is such an important thing to do because as leaders, we can always do better. But we need to stop and recognize what we need to get better at. And let me share with you one of my favorite stories, one of the stories that in my career still resonates deep inside of me. I spoke at a conference in London, Ontario, 10 or 15 years ago. In the audience was a gentleman who owned a large greenhouse. And at the end of the session, he asked me if I could do some consulting work for his business. Now, keep in mind, we often get called into organizations when there are some people issues. So my first question is, what's the issue? And he said, Michelle, I don't think we have an issue yet. We've got 30, 40 staff, good team, we have fun, we work hard. I want to make sure that everything's good. And I thought, wow, how refreshing. So here is somebody that thinks there isn't a problem yet, that wants to proactively identify. Beautiful. Most of you should do that. So off I go to London, Ontario. It's actually just outside of London. And I meet one-on-one with every employee. Ask questions on a scale of 1 to 10. How happy are you here? What do you like? What don't you like? What does the company do well? Is it good communication? Same questions to all of the employees. 85% of the employees planned on quitting, actively looking for another job. 85% were about to quit. Now, I don't know about you, but if you lost 85% of your staff, what would that do to you and your business? And there was one common denominator. His name was Bob. Bob was the warehouse or plant manager. He ran the greenhouse, basically. They would have a bet in the morning as to what kind of day it would be based on the way Bob drove into the parking lot. Bob was passionate. Bob would throw his cell phone across the room if he found a plant wasn't right. Bob would yell passionately if something wasn't right. Bob was the reason why 85% of the employees were looking for work. So I sat down with the owner and said, here's your reason. He knew. He just wanted somebody to confirm that. So what did I do? This is the part of my job I don't like. I had to meet with Bob and share with him the information. Now, as human beings, none of us like negative feedback. It hurts. So his first comment, as he pushed the report away, it was a bad time of year, it was stressful, you came at the wrong time. If you came another month later, it would have been easier, better, things are going on. And he was very, very defensive. But after he continued to digest, he sat back and realized that his behavior as a leader wasn't good. And he said, Michelle, put me in leadership kindergarten, please. And we worked together for 3 years. Bob is now, in my opinion, one of the best leaders. He has taken his role as a leader seriously. And he is now not only passionate about the greenhouse, but he's passionate about his people. And he's helping them grow, like the plants that he grows. Every year, he steps back to look at what he needs to work on. So each and every one of you, I encourage you to step on the balcony. There's lots of ways of doing this, and maybe during the question session I can share with you some of the ways of doing this, but it's important that you look in the mirror and you ask yourself about your leadership style and what you need to do to be a better leader. Because remember, you are impacting people's lives. So let's talk about poor performance. Well, let's pretend that you are a good leader. You step on a balcony. You're always developing and growing. But let's talk about why sometimes people aren't performing, why they're just not doing what you expected them to do. Here are 3 reasons. The number one reason, bar none, is lack of clear expectations, that they don't know what's expected of them. Now, I don't know about you, but when you run your business, we know our businesses intimately. We know everything about our business. It's in our blood. It's in our DNA. When we explain to somebody to do something, we often don't give them the detail they need because they don't have the history that we have. So we explain it assuming they've got everything else in their brain that we do about what we expect. And when a manager says to me, Michelle, I've got a problem with this employee, the very first question I ask them, do they know what's expected? That's the first question you ask yourself. Do they know what's expected? The second reason for poor performance is lack of skill or resources. They either can't do the job, they're just not skilled in that area, or they don't have the tools to do the job. And the third most common reason for poor performance is lack of consequences. This one drives me insane. And when I say lack of consequences, I mean both positive and or negative. Mary's doing a fabulous job. She goes above and beyond. She works extra long. She pays special attention to the equipment. She's great with customers. And nobody at any time gives her positive feedback on it. So she says, why should I keep doing this? Because it doesn't feel good. I'm not getting the positive reinforcement. Vice versa. Mary comes in late, she calls in sick, she's not reliable, she has a crappy attitude. Nobody says anything to her. Why should she change? So this slide is an important one for all of you, and I suggest that maybe you even download this and keep this handy, because at any given time, if one of your employees is not performing, ask yourself these three questions. Let me share with you a story that happened this week. We helped a client, a manufacturing company, hire a receptionist about a year and a half ago. Now, this company has had 4 receptionists in probably 3 or 4 years. They have a hard time keeping receptionists. We think we finally found a good one. So she's been there for a bit. First couple of months, everybody's pleased. Yeah, fabulous. Vanessa's great, great hire, bubbly, fabulous. I get a phone call Monday night. Need to fire Vanessa. Let's write up the letter. Let's let her go. Now, time out. Legally, we can't do that. We need to have just cause, or we should have just cause. So my question then, number 1, does she know what you expect? What's the issue? Well, she's not doing this, she's not doing that. So number 1, does she know what's expected? Yes, we told her what's expected. Are you sure? Yes, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago. What did you talk about in that meeting? And suddenly, as the conversation continued, the meeting was composed of a bunch of things, and her having to do a certain task was one of the minute little points of discussion. I suggested that they sit down with her and clarify lack of expectations, clarify what they expect, give her specific examples of what they expect, and to see what happens. That was Monday. She stayed late Tuesday. Wednesday apparently completed everything and more of what they wanted. And I'm curious to see what she's done today. She just needed to know what they expected, what the priority was, and what they wanted. So as a leader, remember these 3 things. Because if somebody's not performing, leverage talent to drive organizational behaviors. One of the first things is that you need to have a vision. And again, those of you that have been following me, I'm quite adamant about a leader having a vision. And if you really want to leverage the talent, you have the vision and you understand where everybody's talents are and how you can use those talents to drive organizational objectives. And if you involve your people in the vision and ask them to participate in making the vision a reality, you'd be surprised at how many people put their hand up and say, well, I can do that, or I love doing that. I prefer to do that. So make sure that the objectives are cascaded throughout. People know the vision and people are involved. You also want to have individual performance goals linked to organizational objectives. Now, if I'm using a lot of HR lingo, I apologize, but what this basically means is that you should have a performance management system in your business. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it should be once a year at least, preferably twice a year, or for seasonal workers at the end of the season, and talk about the performance and understand what role they play. Let them understand what role they play in the vision. And you'll remember that one of the things that people like, what motivates some people, why people stay, is that they have a sense of purpose and that they understand their role within the company. So you want to have performance goals so that they feel important and they see that what they're doing is of value. And you want to make sure that you have ongoing feedback. And in part of the feedback loop, you're able to really understand what people are good at. Because sometimes we hire somebody to do job A. And if we spend some time watching them and talking to them, we might realize that they have talents that we're not using. And that happens a lot. And I want you to almost consider every employee you have as almost a diamond in the rough. And what is it that's underneath that iceberg that you haven't quite grasped yet? And often you can find that out by asking about their hobbies, what they do in their spare time. It's a fabulous, fabulous thing to be able to help somebody uncover talents and get them using them on your farm. But ideally, you're kind of like this little video in the corner. You're kind of like the conductor of the orchestra. And you want to get all of the instruments lined up. And if somebody's not the best on the cello, shall they move to the violin? So and again, it's not as easy as that, but as a leader, that's part of your talent is to find the talents in others. Another really good and important part of leadership is onboarding. Now, this is onboarding as part of another webinar that we do on hiring, but onboarding is a new buzzword for orientation. And there's a lot of research out now that talks about the impact of onboarding. And what onboarding means is bringing new employees into the business. And I find it that many business owners don't take time to be with a new employee. You know, it's a seasonal employee. He's only going to be here for a month. You know, I'll let Joe, the manager, take care of him. I don't need to really get involved. Again, you are the business leader. You influence the mood and the theme and the culture of your team and your business. It is extremely prudent and important for you to spend some time with your new employees. It's important that they understand your values, your expectations, and the culture of your company. You're setting the theme, and there's no better person to come from than from you. So spend some time with your new people. And if you want some more information on onboarding, I'll gladly send it to you. But there's a lot of research that's speaking specifically to the importance of onboarding. And if you're a leader that thinks that there's no value to it, you're wrong. There's tons of value in it. How do we keep those top performers? So if you're the leader that has recognized your role, you're stepping on the balcony, you're reflecting, and you're growing, you're understanding the 3 reasons for poor performance, and you're active on those 3 reasons, you've got a top-performing team now. What do you do to keep them? One of the easiest and most valuable techniques is just involve them. Involve them in decisions. Ask for their input. I was actually, I was in Abbots, no, where was I last week? Grand Prairie. I was in Grand Prairie last week, and there was a an equipment dealer that was in the group. And the equipment dealer said that he was quite surprised by a story that a farm had bought a piece of equipment. And the farm owner said to the equipment sales guy, you know, I want to get my farm manager here to look at it before we sign the check. I want, you know, his input on it. And the dealership thought that was kind of odd. You know, the owner of the company usually makes the decisions and couldn't quite understand the rationale for it, but waited. I think he just wanted to close the deal. Having said that, the following day, the manager of the farm met at the equipment dealership and looked at the equipment and said there were 3 extras on this piece of equipment that weren't necessary. They were nice to have, but not needed. Saved the farmer $12,000. So the farm manager went back to the farm owner and said, you know, saw the piece of equipment, looks great. We don't need this, this, and this, and you could save this amount of money. And the farm owner was in awe. He thought he was buying this piece of equipment to excite this farm manager, but what excited the farm manager more was being asked for his opinion about the piece of equipment. And that's just one story out of many. But it's so simple to have a quick meeting, let your employees know what's going on, and ask for their input and their direction. We have a dairy farm in Charlottetown, and as they were buying some new beds for the cows, there were a couple of options, and they sat down with some of their milkers and asked their milkers for their opinion. And talk about getting value. I mean, the milkers are with the cows all the time, and they would probably best understand what the cows would want more. So there's fabulous dialogue, and at the end of the day, the decision was still what the owners thought, but getting the information from the employees was valuable, but involving them was even more powerful. Ask their questions. Ask questions often. You liking this? Are you bored? Do you still like it around here? And it could be casual conversations, but get involved. Ask. Invite their opinions and ideas and empower them. Rather than making the decisions, empower them to make their own decisions. One of my favorite clients won't allow a manager to come into his office with a problem unless he's already thought up of a possible solution. Now this took some of the managers off guard. They were so used to going with the problem and the manager would fix it. But let me ask you this. As a leader, if you're always solving problems, how are you training? How are you leveraging the talent of your people? That's the easy button, and you're not going to grow anybody if you keep giving them the spoon. And people love it. Employees are empowered, and when they make the decision that you approve, think about the accountability they have on that outcome. Powerful, powerful and fun. Now, when you start this, again, you might get them caught off guard, but it's a fun process. I'm going to stop right now for about 30 seconds and just open up the comments, the questions, to see if there's any questions so far before I continue. I'll just stop for 30 seconds. I'm actually going to stop for a sip of water. I have Paul is writing a question or comment. I invite everybody. As Leo and Paul are typing, a quote or a statement that I use often when I speak with leaders or I'm coaching leaders is that every manager owns the engagement of your employee. And if your employees are disengaged, you own that. It's your fault. That's a pretty powerful thing. We have an important role to play as a manager and as a leader. And the last thing you want are employees that are the quit and stay employees, the ones that have completely disengaged and are still on your payroll, but actually costing you money rather than making you money. So Leo and Paul are still typing. I'll just wait a few more minutes or a few more seconds.
Well, Michelle, while we're waiting for the questions, and great they're typing questions, but maybe not related to this, but maybe you can just expound a little bit on what you way back when you talk about safe. Oh, there you go. There's Paul's question. Sorry, I'll ask the question later.
Thanks, Don. Paul says, when I interview someone, I will ask about his hobbies, their tech gadgets, and how they deal with stress. The stress question really throws him off balance, and I was wondering if I should phrase the question differently. Paul, good question, and stress is always a good question. Now, the problem that we have in interviews, we as interviewers, is we often ask open-based questions. Yes or no, or how would you, if I give you this situation, you're in the field, the combine gets plugged, and something's happening, how would you handle it? Now, those questions allow people to fabricate. It allows them to create the story. What you want to do is create something referred to as behavior-based questions. And these are questions that ask people how they behaved in the past. So stress, for example. You want to know how somebody handled stress in the past. So if your question says, and again, Paul, I'm going back to the stress question. If you say, well, how do you handle stress? They may not know really how to explain how they handle stress. So I would rephrase that question to, tell me about a day in the last month that you remember as being somewhat stressful. One of those days where you just wish it would end. And typically people will start to then share that story. And you'll notice that when I asked the question, I took the word stress, but then I also sort of made them comfortable by saying one of those days that you wish would just end. So that most people are able to relate to one of those days. And by asking that question, they're going to give you the situation that they were in. There's a story years ago of an insurance company that we did some work with, and they wanted to hire a receptionist administrative assistant. And the owner said that this person needed to handle stress because she would be working for 6 brokers. She'd be the front desk reception and admin for all of the brokers, so somebody that could multitask and handle stress. And during the interview, the owner asked the young candidate if she could handle stress, and she said, "Oh, absolutely, I'm the stress queen. People say that I'm so calm during stress." Now, there's an open-ended question. Can you handle stress? Yes. People during an interview typically will say what they think they expect you to say. And people, believe it or not, especially coming from schools, are trained in job search. So they have up to 40 hours of interview techniques. Many of them are trained more than we are as business owners to ask questions. In any event, so go back to the stress question. So I took that question around and said to this young girl, well, then give me an example of a stressful day for you in the last month, and what happened? And her body language became somewhat panicky, and she said she remembered it clearly. And she started to describe a day in which her boss was on the phone looking for a package. There was a fax coming in, a broker was waiting for a fax. The phone was ringing, there were people in the waiting room, and she sort of set the parameters of this stressful day, which in my opinion didn't sound that stressful. But to her it was a stressful day. So as she continued to describe her stressful day, I added another question and said, well, how'd you feel? And she said, oh, it was really crazy. And then I added another question and said, well, what did you do to handle the stress? And she said, I went to the bathroom, I had a little cry, and I regrouped. Do you do that often? And she said, that's how she handles stress. And so when I share that story, we often get a giggle because we comment saying that perhaps she'd be in the bathroom all day working in a stressful environment. But where I'm going with this, Paul, is that when you ask questions, you should ask behavior-based questions. And if you Google that, you'll get lots of information. But you should ask it in a way where you maybe change the word stress to just one of those frustrating days. And if somebody gets a little confused or caught off guard, just keep digging. Just keep changing the wording and keep digging. One of the powerful things when you're doing the interviews is with every question about a skill, you should ask a couple sort of below that to keep trying to find the truth. Leo, thank you. So Leo says, how do you deal with it when an employee who needs an ego boost and who has given you a suggestion you can't support? Assume you cannot quantify an argument as to why. That's a good one. So can everybody see? Yes, everybody can see the questions. So the employee needs an ego boost. They give a suggestion and you can't implement it. That's a very good question because, first of all, why does he or she need an ego boost? And is there another way that you can give them an ego boost rather than trying to implement their suggestion? And if you can't implement it, there should be some way why you can rationalize why you can't implement it. And when somebody does need an ego boost, you have to ask yourself, again, why? Not sure I answered that, but let's keep going, and perhaps you might find something in the rest of the presentation. But that's a challenging one, Leo. Thank you. So let's continue. Let's talk about, again, keeping your key performers. I often will say people either cost you money or make you money. And if somebody is costing you money, you have to ask yourself why you're keeping them. Because people in a business should be making you money. They're your resource, and you should be leveraging that resource. And if somebody is costing you money, you're not leveraging their talent. And if they don't have the talent to work for you and they're costing you money, you shouldn't have them. So you need to identify your key performers. And I want you to remember that 99% of all employees want to do a good job. They get up in the morning. They don't want to go and do a crappy job. When they wake up in the morning, nobody wants to do a bad job. How they perform is a reflection of whom they work for. And remember your role as a leader. Organizing people around purpose is the most powerful form of engagement and retention. It doesn't matter what level you're at, whether you're in the pig barn or whether you are working the numbers of a company. Everybody needs a sense of purpose. And we need to make sure that everybody in our business, on our farm, feels important. So how do we do that? And Leo, this might help you out a little bit. We need to understand how to give feedback. And here's an experiment that we did about 8 years ago in Winnipeg. And what we did is we took 100 managers that we've worked with, and we phoned every manager, and we said to the managers, in the last 6 months, have you given any feedback, positive or negative, to any of your staff? 100 managers. Guess how many said yes? We had 92 of the 100 that said yes. As a manager, I recognize how important feedback is. Of course, I'm a great manager. I give feedback daily. 92. So then we phoned the employees of the 100 and asked the 100 employees, in the last 6 months, has your manager given you feedback, positive or negative? I would die to hear what you guys are guessing in your heads. 16 employees said they had received feedback. Now, I don't know about you, but the math doesn't work. 92 managers said they gave feedback. Only 16 heard the feedback. Now, that is something wrong with that equation. So we began to look into the why, and it's just simple. It's very, very simple, you guys. It's about effective feedback because we as managers do a crappy job of giving feedback. So I'm going to teach you how to give feedback. There's 2 types of feedback. There's reinforcement and there's redirection. Reinforcement is a behavior that you want repeated. You want somebody to do something again, so you want to reinforce it. So the feedback of thank you is useless. Thank you isn't heard. Thank you doesn't let the employee know what you're thanking them for. So for those of you that are saying thank you, great job, change it because that's not valuable feedback. So feedback feedback is reinforcement, what you want repeated. And when somebody is doing something wrong, you want to redirect them. So let me show you how to do it. It's actually pretty simple. Reinforcement is 3 steps. It's describe the behavior you want repeated, explain the impact, and then thank them. Pretty simple. Let me show you. I had somebody on my staff by the name of Monica. This is years ago, and when we were first starting the business. And Monica's talent is detail. She's really good at taking care of details, which is not my talent. So we were doing in fact, this might even have been the report for Bob, the bad leader story that I was telling you earlier. So we're doing a report. It's due the next morning, and it's about 7 o'clock on a weeknight, and we're trying to finish this report. It's a paper report that's got graphs and color, and it's bound, and we're tired and hungry. Again, it's 7 o'clock, and we're putting the final touches on this report. Monica stops and says, Michelle, I found a mistake on page 6. And sure enough, there's a mistake on page 6. And it's a substantial mistake. It's a number, it's a calculation of respondents, and we have to change it. It's inaccurate. Now again, we're tired, we're hungry, but we're going to make this change. So we finally finish by about 8 o'clock or so, and as we're leaving, I pat Monica on the back and say, thank you. And she looks tired, and off we go. And the next day I come to the office, and she's just not on. She still looks tired, and I say to myself, well, we did work until 8 o'clock last night, and poor kid probably went home and had a late dinner. And I realized, speaking to a client as I'm preaching to someone else, that I, the shoemaker's son story, wasn't providing valuable feedback, that I had actually demotivated her because, first of all, I didn't appreciate her, and my feedback was useless. Yet when I think about feedback, feedback is behavior you want repeated. So I need to reinforce. So I went to her and said, Monica, I apologize for not giving you feedback earlier, but I want to tell you how much I love your attention to detail. Your attention to detail is exactly what I need. Your attention to detail caught an error that would have made our company look bad and made me look bad. Your attention to detail is so important. Thank you so much for being my detail queen. Now you'll notice in that conversation that I used attention to detail 4 times. So when I finish the conversation, she knows exactly what it is that I'm thanking her for. Monica did become our detail queen. A bit to the anal point, but she did become our detail queen because she knew that was the behavior that I really wanted. Simple stuff. We have a farmer in Swift Current that I was having some issues with some packaging of product, or I can't remember exactly what it was, and he practiced this reinforcement, and he said he's got the behavior of that employee down, fine-tuned to exactly what he wants. So all what you need to do when you want behavior repeated is make sure that the employee knows what you want repeated. State that behavior. Make sure they understand it. Simple. Really, really simple. What we're bad at is we're bad at redirecting. It's that negative conversation. Somebody's doing something wrong. So let me share this story with you. And this is a fabricated story. Pretend it's the middle of winter and you're in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's minus 40. And I decide that I'm going to take a group of you to Hawaii on my private jet. Now, I have a fairly new pilot on this private jet, and I'm confident. He's a good guy. We get onto the plane. All of us are quite excited. We're going to Hawaii for this training session on leadership, and everybody's getting seated on the plane. Margaritas are going around. And the pilot comes on, and the pilot says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back and enjoy. We will be in Hawaii in about 8 hours. Sit back, enjoy, and I'll connect with you soon." Plane takes off. We're having fun. Everybody's talking about leadership, and we're sharing some of our stories about our employees. And I decide, after about an hour into the flight, to go and check on the pilot. And as I walk into the cockpit, I see that he's a little bit off guard or off track. I look at his little GPS-y thing, his little computer, and I see that he's not following the line. But I shrug my shoulders. Don't want to deal with it now. Don't want to have a conversation with him about being off the line. So I come back. And I sit back with you guys, and we continue our chat. A couple more hours go by, and we hear, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We have to make a bit of a delay. We're going to be in the North Pole. We have to refuel. We'll be in the North Pole for a day. My apologies. I'll be in touch soon." I go back to the pilot and ask him what happened. And the pilot says that kind of got off course, and we're now in the North Pole. Now, the reason I share that story is because if I had addressed the pilot being off track right when he was, there would have been a little blip. He wouldn't have been overly offended. He would have realized he was off. It would have been easy to get back on track. None of you would really have noticed anything. But as a result of not addressing his poor performance, and not redirecting him, not giving him the feedback, he went way off track, a lot harder to fix, a heck of a lot more expensive, and now a lot of people are involved. How many of you have an employee that is a poor performer that you have not addressed? And trying to figure out how to do it now because you haven't done it is going to be almost impossible. Here's how you do it. 5 steps. First thing is you just want to state the behavior you want changed. Joe, I realized the last 2 weeks you haven't taken care of the machinery. One of the important parts of your job is the preventative maintenance of the machinery. That's step number 1, preventative maintenance of the machinery. Step number 2, you wait for the reasons. Now, this is where we go off track, and this is where we as managers or leaders get caught up in the excuses. Joe is going to talk about being too busy. Joe's going to talk about other priorities. Joe's going to talk about Bill. Joe's going to have all these reasons. And we end up going down that gossip line. And then we don't finish our redirection. Redirection is behavior that you need to change. So listen to two. And then you just repeat. Joe, it's really important that you take care of the equipment. We rely on you to take care of the equipment. What are you going to do from this moment on to make sure that we can rely on you to take care of the equipment? Now see, so step number 3 is you just remind them of the behavior you want. Step number 4 then asks them to come up with a solution, because you want them to create the solution. Because if you create the solution for them, it's being forced on them, and there's a good chance they won't follow it. Great, Joe. Looking forward to checking in on this in a week or two. Know you can do it. Maintaining the equipment is your job. And you'll notice, like reinforcement, I talk about the behavior 3 or 4 times. And we practice this. Reinforcement is a lot easier. Redirection gets easier as you practice it. But like the pilot, the sooner you do it, the easier it is. So I want you to remember that as leaders, you need to use your influence at the right time for the right reasons. You have exceptional high influence on people and their lives. And you want to create a positive environment and a positive workplace so people go home and they talk great things. Because if you're talking about recruiting, recruiting comes from having a great place to work. And you create the place to work. You want to make sure that you lead yourself successfully. Before you can lead others, you've got to take charge of your own leadership. And you've got to step on the balcony. And you've got to figure out what you need to do to be a better leader. And you need to continue to search for the best answers, not the familiar ones. You want to change. You want to get people excited about where you're going and what you're doing. And you want to inspire and motivate rather than intimidate and manipulate. You want to inspire people to feel good about what they do and where they're working. And you want to understand that a continued success is a result of continued improvement. You've always got to be growing yourself, your business, your department, your team. And when you encounter setbacks, you've got to turn them into comebacks. So rather than having the woe is me, what did we learn? How do we do it differently? So remember, as a leader, each and every one of you have an incredible amount of influence on people and their lives, which in turn impact your business. It's a great place to be, and we've always got to be aware of it. And what we say and what we do is amplified 10 times. So be careful, but have fun. So having said that, open it up to, that we could ask questions now on the phone as well as typing. And I see that Paul has a question. If you become aware of someone stealing from you and you want to keep the employee, how would you handle it? Very good question, Paul. First of all, I would have something referred to as an intervention meeting. It's kind of like that TV show now about interventions. And this intervention is about the behavior. So you need to, legally, you want to write them up. You want to have some paper trail about the theft. I'm hoping that you know personally that he stole and that this isn't coming third party. If it's coming third party, you've got to be really careful. So if it's you yourself know for a fact that he's stealing, but he's a good performer, intervention meeting based on his performance and lack of trust. So right now as an employer, you need to redirect him because you can't trust him. So you can't trust him because of this theft. So try to find out what happened, why he did it. Remind him that you need to trust him, what he's going to do to build that trust, and document his file. And I would suggest that you actually have a formal letter that you actually mail to him or give him. Anybody else? Let's open it up.
Okay, right on, Michelle. So anybody who wants to get involved in the discussion, get to your keyboard or just unmute your phone by *6 and pose your question and mute your phone by *6. So while we're waiting, Michelle, what you just talked about with Paul, it seems to me that you need to probably document both the positive and the negative, I guess it is. I mean, it's good to have that, immediate feedback, but down the road, when you do performance review or whatever, I mean, for me, I don't want to rely on my memory.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to document things for sure, but be really, really careful with the positive and negative, and let me tell you why. Psychologically, there is some research that says that when you have a meeting and you do the, and I'll use Paul's name, Paul, you're a really good employee, I love having you here. They're hearing that, and there's this blood flow sort of in the front of the brain that's getting all this wonderful feeling of these compliments. So when you get to the theft, the impact of the conversation about the theft isn't as impactful because you sandwich it. And in my HR world or my human performance world, it's actually referred to as sandwiching. And sandwiching is proven to not be as effective. And what a sandwich means is that the manager goes, oh, you're wonderful, wonderful, but you're bad, 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 but you're wonderful, wonderful. So the impact is in between the two pieces of bread, if you will. If you have a performance issue with somebody, you want to get straight to the point. You don't want to sugarcoat it. You want to get to the point and make sure they understand exactly what you expect. And believe it or not, as harsh and as hard as you think it might be, employees prefer that. So Paul needs to have a frank conversation about the theft and to use those points in redirecting. But, Dawn, you're right. Document, have little notes everywhere, because if, for example, if in Paul's situation, if Paul confronts this employee about the theft, and let's say a month or two later you decide to fire this person because you think you have grounds, this person could go to the labor, I don't know what province you're in, Paul, but the person could go to the labor board and say that, you never really spoke to him about it, and he didn't consider it theft. He thought he had access to it. So there's a lot of he said, she said. So it's in your best interest to have that very frank conversation and confront him. And it'd be interesting to understand why he stole what he stole, because sometimes I've heard that employees didn't realize it was theft. So it would be interesting to hear that. But thank you, Don, because you are right. Document, write it down, and we can't rely on our memories, because what we saw somebody do a month ago and a week ago can sometimes be different in our minds.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Michelle. And particularly when you get in a situation where you have performance bonuses or whatever, you need to have some track record so that you can say definitely you've performed very well, and over the course of a year, here's some examples. But I don't know about anybody else, but my memory's pretty short. So let's hear some other questions. So if anybody's got any questions, please get to your keyboard and let's have that discussion. While we're waiting, Michelle, for some questions, you had said earlier on you had noted about stepping on the balcony and some ways to do that. Maybe you want to just explain what you meant about stepping on the balcony.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a whole topic in itself on the whole leadership assessment. There are a lot of tools that are available to businesses for stepping on the balcony. And that's sort of my phrase. A phrase, if you wanted to Google it, would be something called a Leadership 360, leadership assessments. There's questionnaires, there's online questionnaires, but there's lots of ways that you can get step on the balcony and understand how you're doing. The most powerful way that I find is something referred to as a 360. And what a 360 does is it doesn't just have you assess yourself, but it gets your team to assess you. And a good way of doing that is maybe asking one of your staff to pass out a questionnaire about your performance, and it could be 10 questions about your leadership. Again, you can get those on the internet. And he or she goes around and gets all the answers, and they're assigned to kind of compile everything, so there's a level of confidentiality. And he or she presents you with what your staff are saying. And even if you've got 3 or 4 staff, often you could just even go for dinner or sit down over coffee and ask them. Now, the first couple times you do that, of course they're not going to say bad things, but as they get more comfortable about you asking about your performance, the more comfortable they will be. We have a leek farmer, a really small farm, and the owner, a fairly young man, does this monthly. And we'll sit down with, he's only got, I think, 4 staff, and he'll sit down and say, okay, what did I do good this month, and what did I not do good? And he gets incredible feedback from his team, and he's created a culture at his farm about ongoing growth for everybody. So it's really refreshing. So there's lots of ways, but if you Google, do a Leadership 360, and there's lots and lots of stuff about that, and that will put you on the balcony. Ian and Leo are typing.
Yeah, they certainly are. So hopefully, I'm sure their questions will appear shortly. So bottom line is step on the balcony, but not over the railing.
That's right. I had one person when I talked about stepping on the balcony and sort of exposing yourself. His comment was, "Well, I'll step on the balcony, but I'm keeping my clothes on."
There's a question from Leo, Michelle.
Like sandwiching, if you ask for input and then ignore it, or worse, have to point out the problem with the employee's suggestion, how do you put a positive spin on it? Well, first of all, you shouldn't ignore it. So if you ask for input, you shouldn't ignore it. And if you are ignoring it, you have to ask yourself why. Or yet, if you have to point out the problem with the employee's suggestion. Sometimes you don't have to put a positive spin on things. People generally, most people want the truth. And if a suggestion is really insane, there's no advantage to you saying, it's a good idea, but it's just a matter of being honest without being rude. Because again, people respect honesty. But with any suggestion, there should be some sort of rationale as to why the suggestion won't work within your organization. And I'll share one with you just in terms of my own business. We are launching, my company is launching a speaking bureau specific to HR and agriculture. So we're working with some speaking bureaus in North America about my keynotes. And one of my staff made a comment about the video that we're going to do. And in my head, I was quite passionate about the way we were going to do this video. And she made a comment that at the time I thought really made no sense. And my comment to her was, at this moment, I like the idea, kind of, but not really. I can't answer why. I don't think it's going to work, but my gut is saying it's not a reason for it. And she kind of respected that. And it took me 2 days. And after 2 days, I was able to tell her why I felt it wasn't going to work, and it was good dialogue. So I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but I don't think you need to sugarcoat it. Because if you become known as a manager that sugarcoats, employees will know that whenever you say something nice, they're going to expect something negative at the end of it. And I have a few clients like that. Ian, can you please speak to monetary versus non-monetary rewards? Money isn't usually the first thing people work for, but how best? Oh, Ian, that's a full day. That's a full day conference. Non-monetary, particularly with the Gen X and the Gen Ys, believe it or not, is huge. I just came back from a conference in my industry that spoke specifically about the new generation and about what the drivers are. And money, not only for that generation, but money overall, on average in Canada, is not one of the top 3 retention techniques. It is deemed sometimes a recruiting technique. However, that is changing a bit. But retention, money isn't number 1. Appreciation, flexibility is becoming really popular. Something that I'm seeing, a trend that I'm seeing that I think is going to stick around is the compensation letter. So when you hire somebody and they're going to make $15 an hour, for example, but you're providing them with uniforms and work boots, and they get use of the truck, and they get gas, and they get room and board, and they get meals. The letter that you give them, the contract or the agreement, actually then says you're getting $18 an hour, plus you're getting this, 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 and this, which actually equates to another $10 an hour. So really, Mr. Smith, you're making $28 an hour working for our farm. So what happens is psychologically, people then feel prouder because they now see that what they're making is really $28, even though their actual salary is less. But there's a lot of research available on non-monetary stuff, and a lot of it really is just appreciation, flexibility, challenge, education, conferences, workshops. We have a hog farmer that just sent 2 of his guys to a hog meeting, and these 2 barn managers came back like they were at Christmas. It was really, really exciting for them. So I'm sorry I can't spend more time on that, Ian, but it is a topic of conversation that, particularly in farms, because we as farmers often can't pay a lot of money. So we need to get creative about other things that we can do. I've got some farmers that will rent land. Some farmers will share a cow. Share in certain things. Again, you've got to figure out what the employee wants, because if you're not motivated by owning a cow, then my giving you a cow in lieu of pay isn't a motivator. So it's one of those compensation questions that you need to understand who's in your team and what motivates them. But you're right, money is not the top retention or motivator.
Thanks, Michelle. Do you think you could condense the full day down to 60 minutes?
On monetary?
No, what I was thinking of was maybe we'll have you back for another webinar.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah.
I could keep talking all day.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you're right. There's lots to talk about, but Ian is right. Money doesn't get you everything that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just about ready to conclude, but we have time for a question or two more. So if anybody has any questions, please get your keyboard, or again, as I said, unmute your phone and pose your question orally. Maybe while we're waiting for a question or two to close out the session, Michelle, early on in your presentation, you talked about building a safe place to work. Can you define what you mean by safe? Like, is safe, do you take the broad perspective, or do you have something specific about safe place to work?
Yeah, but it's pretty much the broad. I've had some employees who have left farms who say, the equipment is falling apart, or that the farmer doesn't care about the safety, or he or she let them do something that they shouldn't have been doing. There was one story about having to climb a grain bin, and somebody else was talking about something near an auger. So the employees are concerned about their own safety and not feeling that the owner of the farm was paying attention to safety. And as a result, you then question how much they would. He just felt that it was a dangerous place to work because the farmer didn't seem to care about anything that was safe. And having said that, I think all of us are impacted, or if you're not yet, you will be soon, because health and safety are now playing a pretty big role in farms and coming down quite hard on farms. So, we need to look at farms, our farms, and what safety we have within our farms. But everybody wants a great place to work, and in terms of recruiting, people are now doing research on farms to say, well, what kind of reputation do they have about their equipment or about their safety. And it's the recruiting game has changed because people are researching, and they're trying to figure out what kind of business owner you are and who you're involved with and what associations you belong to. And it's interesting because safety is one that comes up.
Okay, well, thanks, Michelle. Looks like we're not getting any more questions, and we're getting close to the time when we need to stop the session. So I think Michelle will just call it a halt right now. So we appreciate your presentation, Michelle. You defined a workplace that encourages growth. You articulated leadership as the ability to assist employees to reach new heights they may have never experienced and to keep climbing. Note was made about key performance retention, organizational objectives, and then having a clearly defined purpose that all employees and managers understand. And lastly, you had suggestions about performance, whether it's reinforcement or redirection. Bottom line is, from your presentation, Michelle, you talked more than once about watch, ask, listen. Lots of food for thought that we may have pushed to the back shelves or are not aware of. Now you've highlighted some ways to build an effective organization that employees enjoy and encourages them to reach new levels of excellence. Thank you for a great presentation, Michelle. All the best over the days and weeks ahead. Have a great day, Michelle.
Thanks, everybody.